Hey guys, so we're gonna kick off in another 2 minutes. Hang on tight. Enjoy the brightness of the green screen here. And get started. Again, good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. Hope the week is going well and you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Really excited to be here, part of the Maker Faire. Really sad that, part of the Maker Faire, a lot of it has been the ability to kind of move around and navigate in person down at the Wilson campus. So it's a little sad, but again, we're moving with the times, as I think is symbolic right now in terms of education and where we're heading. So kudos to the Maker Faire team for transitioning to making this available online. It's not an easy feat to do, to transition to taking such a powerful conference online. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone on that team. My name is Carlos Vasquez. I'm the CEO and founder of Miami EdTech. Miami EdTech, we're an education nonprofit focused on providing educators with professional development in the areas of computer science primarily, and also entrepreneurship. So really empowering educators to prepare students. That's our approach. And as we move forward here, today's topic is what does it mean to be workforce ready, and how do we prepare our students for jobs of today? And I say today with emphasis because a lot of times when you hear people say the jobs of the future, it doesn't have the same emphasis on or the same urgency, which I think we need to have in education, right? I feel like for a long time we've relied on um, you know uh, not being urgent, and then all of a sudden COVID hits, and we really knew how to be urgent, how to transition to urgency. So that's the same level of urgency we need to have when we think about what does it mean to prepare our students for the workforce. And a couple of things that you'll see on the screen on the bottom left, the link bit.ly /go workforce is a really short form if you're interested in signing up to receive some of our material on this specific topic that we're going to talk about today. We've created a micro-credential badging system for students, and that's what we're going to dive into. So the idea is to give you all a very tangible experience, and something that you can, if for those of you who are teachers or even parents, can use, or anyone really invested in the success of our students, whether it's socially, academically, or as I mentioned, tied to workforce. So that's what this presentation today is about. A little bit about myself, just to kind of give you some context. Who's this guy talking about workforce? Well, my background really has been at the intersection of education and technology. Most recently at the intersection of 4-year-olds diaper change and living process at home. So that's my son, who now as an educator and as a parent, I've taken on a whole new perspective on what it means to prepare our students, prepare our kids, because a lot of times when you speak of workforce and you speak workforce education, we tend to think of higher education, put a lot of pressure on our high school teachers and our, you know, colleges and community colleges. But really, workforce is a K through 12 thing, actually pre-K through 12 thing. Okay, so you know that's one thing I want to emphasize is that we all need to unite in, you know, throughout the landscape as it relates to preparing. So when I think about all of the skills and things that I'm trying to cultivate in my son around empathy, his worldview, how he respects and appreciates diversity, you know, these are things that I'm doing intentionally, right? These are inputs that I'm providing at our home along with my wife. We're doing these things intentionally, and that's going to be kind of a theme in today's presentation, is this idea of how can you be intentional as an educator with your practice, specifically around workforce development. So that's the theme. We have a lot of themes we present on, but specifically around workforce. What does it mean to participate in the workforce? So outside of my role at Miami EdTech, I love sports. Play basketball down at Jose Marti, not too far from Wolfson on the weekends, not for a long time now, obviously, given what's happening. I'm a brother, as you see, a father, and technology to me, I came to Miami almost 10 years ago, growing up in New York City, but actually I lived in San Francisco where I worked at a nonprofit that built called Year Up. And we did, my specific role was curriculum creation and figuring out how to get young people who are under-resourced and help train them for jobs at like some of the big companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, Mozilla, like all those big companies. So I got a really deep look inside of those companies to figure out like, what does it mean to prepare someone to go from, you know, from not really having exposure to working in the entry-level environment. So again, as I mentioned, Miami EdTech, our core focus is computer science and professional development. We work with the school system here to provide training for teachers. We've just recently finished up a computer science where we had teachers who earned their computer science certificate for the state. And then I mentioned the entrepreneurship. So we work with teachers, or not just teachers, anyone who's interested in creating solutions to some of the challenges we face in education, from idea to app. Basically, we support all of those ventures. So the big question that we're addressing in today's conversation, the big question, I'll read it. It's a lot of words on the screen. So, and I want you all to reflect on this as well. Do you think, does current K through 12 education equip every student with the requisite skills to become innovators and problem solvers, or even informed citizens to succeed in this world with pervasive computing? And I put pervasive computing in a different font color there because, you know, computing has really obviously impacted every facet of society, right? Everywhere you go, every job, from plumber, anything in agriculture, you name it, has been impacted in some way through technology, specifically computers, right? So we have to ask ourselves, has education done that, right? Have we evolved to do the same, right? I mean, historically, we've said that in a school setting, the classroom, the computer classroom, is typically one room somewhere in the building with that one computer teacher who everybody goes to for help, right? So have we evolved, or is that still something you feel and see? That's still something I see, because every teacher now is a technology teacher in a way, right? Like the incorporation of technology into everyday subjects like science and math, you know, English, really anything has to be more about the journey than the destination. So how are we getting students to use technology, and are we doing it in a way that gets them prepared? Entrepreneurship, or even as collaborators, you know, we have a global economy now. So that's something we've been really researching and thinking about, how do we do that? So, you know, I want to talk a little bit more about how we've kind of evolved. If you remember, for those of you who maybe follow education, follow any of the buzzwords and things that happen, if you go back to 2000, early 2000, we were talking about these 21st century skills. We've always talked about 21st century skills. And this was done through the lens of critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. So these were the four these were the four, I would say, pillars of this idea of preparing our students for the workforce. Are we cultivating these skills, these critical thinking skills, the ability to find solutions, the creativity, ability to think outside the box, collaboration? So, you know, this is going to look different depending on the age, right? Depending on the classroom, depending on the topic. But if we, as educators, are intentional about the cultivation of these skills, then I think that's how we make a huge impact in preparing our students for the workforce. So when this came out, and even to this day, actually, one of the biggest challenges that employers say they face is typically in the area of critical thinking. Employers still list critical thinking as one of the top challenges when it comes to finding, you know, talent. So that's something to think about, right? How are we cultivating critical thinking? Our students are so used to following a schedule, to going from class to class. Like really in the K through 12 world, they are pretty much on our schedule, on a routine. And then we kind of kick them out of the 12th grade classroom, and it's like, boom, you know, the reality of registering for your own classes, of, you know, going out and finding your own solutions, whether it's about, you know, getting into a class or learning something new. So, you know, that for a lot of students, right, it's quite a culture shock. You know, I'm fortunate enough to be teaching at Miami-Dade. I've been teaching at Miami-Dade College now for basically since I moved here 10 years ago. And I see that a lot of students who you know, bright students who deal still with the transition, you know, trouble, and it comes up a lot. So these are the things that we're gonna kind of dive into a little bit and explore. Now, what wound up happening later on after this was that we kind of went through this revolution where we wanted to add a fifth C. And for a lot of people, the fifth C became coding. The coding phenomenon really became something that hit the classroom, and in some ways did actually a disservice, because we brought coding to a classroom where students who had never seen it before or experienced it, as well as teachers, if they didn't feel comfortable learning it, or if there wasn't naturally something that they could be, you know, do, then we kind of turned them off to technology. And I think that was something, again, it was a great thing to bring to education. It's a great thing to continue to show. But we might have did more harm than good, because we really set students to think that coding is what happens at every technology company. And it does, but it's typically a small percentage, right? You need people who think about problems, who come up with solutions, who brainstorm ideas, who do a lot of these things on the 4C side than coding. So, you know, really what would be the right way to establish the foundation of transitioning to technology is the concept of computational thinking. So computational thinking, which is the larger umbrella, and it encompasses coding, of course, and computer science. But computational thinking is this ability to think, you know, logically, is to process a situation, and just as a computer would kind of, a computer scientist would look at something and try to figure out, or even a scientist, if you think about the scientific method, that's really what the types of skills that we want to cultivate. The ability to, you know, make a hypothesis, the ability to test it out, the ability to, you know, encounter a situation and say to yourself, you know, I don't know how to solve this right now, but I'm going to try. And for any of you who have done any research around fixed and growth mindset, you know, mindset is one of the most important things to cultivate in the beginning of any classroom experience, right? Especially as it relates to workforce skills. You know, employers want to hire people who can navigate and work through a problem, find solutions before they, like, you know, break the glass in an emergency, right? So, and that is a problem that employers are saying that they've encountered, where they're seeing employees who, you know, especially younger, who are transitioning to the workforce new, they're seeing them not being able to maneuver a situation and maybe like search for something on Google, but not go beyond the first page. And so we use this term digital natives a lot, and we say that our students are digital natives. Absolutely, they have, in the sense of having technology in their hands, but that doesn't cultivate, you know, digital persistence, right? Digital native means that I grew up with a device, but am I persistent enough to use a device and find a solution? So that'll come up a little bit as we move on in the conversation, because again, Coding allows you to develop these computational thinking skills, but it's not the only way. There are other ways. So coding is obviously a good skill to have, and really important for any student to kind of learn and at least be exposed to. But that's not going to be the only way to get them to develop and cultivate critical thinking, computational thinking skill. So again, just to cover like what is computational thinking, and the reason why, if we go back to that initial slide and the fact that computing is pervasive, because of how pervasive it is, then we need to cultivate computational thinkers, because regardless of the environments they're going to be in for work, there will be an element of technology associated, not necessarily as direct as becoming a web developer, but data entry, research, any job. So this ability to think logically, looking at scenarios and saying, okay, here's a problem, how do I break it down into steps for a solution? It can happen in any first times I had, when I first joined the workforce, after graduating college, I had a situation where I crashed the network trying to make a change, trying to upgrade the network at the job. And, I freaked out. I was like, what do I do? And I was really fortunate that, I basically, at the time was AOL. I went into AOL, I navigated, I found someone in one of the chat rooms who walked me through. This is how old the technology was at the time. I had to find someone who dealt with microwave connections. That's another long story, but had I just quit and said, hey boss, I can't do this, I don't know what to do, that wouldn't have been a successful workforce, characteristic. So one of the things that we can cultivate is this idea of, again, the digital persistence of trying, of seeing a problem, figuring out what am I going to do. So, this is something that can be done in every subject area. And again, a lot of times people think that computational thinking or even computer science is left to one teacher in one subject. And that's just not fair anymore to our students and to society, really, right? So here are some specific ways, and there's more. If you look it up around CT and computational thinking in different subjects, you'll find it. Some things you can do in different classrooms. And it's ultimately, it's not about how to use the technology. It's really looking a little bit deeper than that and figuring out and looking under the hood. So we have students who, again, because the way coding was introduced to classrooms, are really hesitant. Even teachers as adults, right? Like, are hesitant to learn about coding or to learn about tech because of the way we introduced it. So this idea, again, of digital persistence is really critical. That being said, we're going to move into the heart of today's presentation. And the heart of today's presentation is actually looking at what used to be, or still called, the 5E model, which is a way to deliver a lesson. So this is an actual lesson plan template. And when we look at engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. So here you have kind of like these pillars for the lesson. And when we go back to the concept of intentionality, what does it mean to be intentional in cultivating workforce skills for our students? We've created these 6 badges, and we're going to talk about each one today, just kind of give you a high level. But what we've done is embedded these 6 C's here, these badges, so that teachers in the process of creating a lesson are actually checking to see, am I doing this? Does this lesson do it? And a lot of times teachers do this naturally. You're already thinking about it. So I want to make sure that, the key thing to think about is that we're saying to do it intentionally. So to ask yourself, am I incorporating elements of computational thinking in this lesson plan? So that's going to have you look at the lesson plan and really through like metacognition, ask yourself and say, well, if I substituted this activity or this activity, I could cultivate it. Because students already do computational thinking, but unless you tell them that's what they're doing and connect it to, the workforce, then they're not gonna, recognize that they're doing it. And, obviously it's always good to have students feel appreciated and recognized. So this lesson plan here is what does that. So each of these badges, I'm gonna actually walk through and show you some examples of what it could look like, as we have determined that these 6 areas are at the heart of creating or cultivating workforce skills for jobs of today, not of the future. So the first one, critical thinking, which I kind of talked a little bit about, creativity, computational thinking, collaboration, communication, and cultural competency. So really what we're asking educators to do with these badges is, first of all, if the students complete the projects, they earn these cool stickers that look just like this, very Miami-esque. So let's talk a little bit about each one. So if we look at uh, critical thinking, and I'm probably going to need to actually, let's see here. Actually, this might take me to it. Okay. Okay, so here we are. So really, workforce ready or career readiness. So what is critical thinking? And so if we want to think about ways to use technology to cultivate critical thinking, first of all, here are some apps that can do it. But why is it important? Well, we know that, as I mentioned, employers are saying that critical thinking normally tops the charts for the skills that they feel students are not demonstrating when they transition to the workforce. So how do you cultivate that? So if we want students to navigate through issues, um, there's an element of skepticism in today's world. So we think about data and information that our students get. Especially, we can use COVID-19 as an example, right? So COVID-19, what's happening during the pandemic, there's a lot of data out there on what's happening. And what we want to do is cultivate students to be able to see data and ask questions that, help them challenge what's on the surface and go a little deeper. And why is that important? Well, think about what that looks like at work, right? When a challenge comes up in the office or comes up, where they need to learn something new, and they're so used to, being told how to do things and being told what to do, that when they're alone in an environment, they have to learn something, it could be really easy for them to say, oh, sorry, nobody showed me how to do it. I think one of the biggest culture shocks that I've seen with students who become interns, for example, at Miami EdTech. I've had a number of interns through Miami-Dade College and through Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And really one of the first things we do is I give them a task that involves them using a new software and then creating something, but I don't show them how to use it. I challenge them to teach themselves how to use it and to deliver. And it's really interesting to see some students that are so shocked by that. They're like, whoa, what do you mean? And then there are some students who really just kind of go about it and then appreciate it. But how do we make that more of a norm? How do we cultivate that more of a norm? So here, just kind of like is an intentional way to cultivate critical thinking using some of these apps, which I invite you to look at. And again, our guide that we can send has a little bit more specific information, but I'm just giving that high level approach right now and talking about it. So we don't want students memorizing facts. We want them to think about how can they discover for themselves. And we want them to ask questions and be engaged. That's another thing. A lot of times students are really shy, right? Which is okay. But if they're going to need to learn something or get something new or get help, how do we, help them practice, communicating that? So we want them to engage with the world. We want them to be, to find their voice, whether that's through sending an email, a phone call, whatever that might be. So here's a career readiness again. And what we've created is a capstone project that they do. And in order to earn their badge in career in critical thinking, they submit it, and then we have a rubric that goes along with it. So here's the concept of critical thinking. So teachers will get basically a rubric to that they can customize to gauge. And this is a great way to have conversations with students where you sit down and you say, hey, let's talk about your project and elements of critical thinking. How did you demonstrate critical thinking? And once we start to do that, again, it's intentional, and students could be like, wow, that's true, because when we do it through the lens of not so specific and we're just like, hey, did you demonstrate critical thinking? It's kind of like, well, what does that mean, right? What does it mean to think critically? So here we have some bullets, and in our guide, we basically kind of go through how do you assess a student's critical thinking ability. So So that's the first C that we're presenting. The second C we're going to go through is communication. And, you know, I started talking about it a little bit through critical thinking. So I'm piggybacking a little bit on that. But communication in the workplace now, a lot of tools that are used. Clearly, during the pandemic, we've transitioned to communicating via Zoom and all these other platforms, Hangouts, that are out there, but also the ongoing communication tools like Slack, which for those of you who don't know, Slack is kind of like a messenger system that almost like Teams. I guess that's kind of like the inspiration, but Slack allows you to share files, communicate, talk throughout the day. And there's also an element of etiquette that also still boils down to using these communication tools. So synchronously, which is what we're doing now, like live sharing, but asynchronously is still a developing framework that we, you know, if you think about any of you who use LMSs and you have students submit assignments when, you know, their own time by a deadline, that's kind of like that asynchronous approach, right? So giving students the flexibility, especially during this age where, you know, right now everyone has a different daily schedule. So by cultivating these communication skills, it allows for students to really be prepared for how things happen in the workforce. I mean, we have companies transitioning to remote, but just because they're remote work environments, these communication skills become even more important, right? Because you don't have the ability to rely on face-to-face. So again, we created a capstone that allows students to flex that muscle and to learn it and also learn some of the tools. So again, on the right side of the screen, you'll see some technology platforms that you can use. So, you know, I know plenty of teachers who use Slack in the classroom, which is a great way to prepare them for what it's going to look like, you know, when they enter the workforce, whatever that might be. But also just to practice for life, learning a new tool. So we're going to transition to looking now at collaboration. And you'll see that a lot of these have, you know, things in common in the sense of they build on each other. They rely on each other. So communication and collaboration, what's the difference? So communicating involves expressing yourself and your thoughts and ideas. Collaboration is how you do so with other people in the sense of, you know, I think one of the tenets of collaboration is also, you know, empathy, right? So thinking about others and depersonalizing what group work means. Because if you think about it, a lot of our students are traumatized as adults as well about what it means to work on a team. For any of you who have worked on the team and you are the only person who did the work, if that doesn't resonate, maybe you're the one who didn't do the work, but you know, we can't avoid and escape collaboration. It's a natural part of you know, the workforce. So again, how do we cultivate that? And that's going to look different in kindergarten when we're training them to share than what it would look like in high school when we have them working on projects. So this consistent, intentional approach is what we're driving for. And when students can finish tasks together, when they are able to, you know, every member is contributing. For any of you who are interested in anything tied to project-based learning, or for those of you who have used project-based learning, you know, these badges lend themselves well to the experience in project-based learning, where it's not about the project at the end, it's about that whole process of sharing, of giving feedback, of receiving feedback. These are all tenets that workforce require, I mean, for successful workforce transition. So some tools that are used to do so, again, you've probably seen them and have used Google Drive, Trello, which is a great project management tool, Padlet. So the more students see these tools in different classrooms through different teachers and different experiences, the more likely they are to start to develop these skills, right? Because we don't want to rely on that, again, that one classroom to do it. So if we're going to really prepare students for the workforce, for jobs of today, they need to see these things consistently throughout their daily, you know, lives. So here's the third C, which is collaboration. So just to kind of summarize so far, we looked at critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. And then now we're going to dive into creativity, computational thinking, and cultural competency. So you can see here that in the lesson plan, these checks mean that you have included an element of these in your lesson here. So we're going to look at creativity now as I load this up. Again, creativity is another one that can feel a little abstract, right? When we tell students, be creative, just be creative. And, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with soft skills and cultivation of soft skills is how do you get someone who believes that they're not creative to feel creative? And it goes back to a mindset and belief system. I never considered myself, when I was younger, creative. Although I was always like a problem solver and found, creative ways, I always thought of creativity as something to do with art, really. And I think that might be something that we want to point out to our students is that that's not necessarily what it means. In this case, some of the tools that we're looking at make it easier to become creative through an artistic form. So for example, Canva, for those of you who have never seen it before, Canva is a great tool for students to quickly create through templates. It's like a PowerPoint templates, but they can create social media images. It really gives them a creative license that, it's hard to do for anyone who might not have that, that creative, artistic bone. So here are some more apps that Powtoon is a video creation tool. So it's a really simple way to put together a powerful video. And, if we want our students trying new things and doing different things, we're going to need to teach them these tools that they can do so. I think emphasizing that it means more than being artistic is key. It's learning how to be creative and to think about new systems. Again, this ties obviously in with communication and collaboration, right? Because just because you're creative, you still have, there's still a need to express that creativity and that opinion in a way that's mindful of others. So here's creativity. Again, we have a rubric that goes along with it that allows for teachers to kind of determine, how is the student demonstrating creativity. And we'll jump into the next one, which is cultural competency. So cultural competency, obviously right now in this age of, in terms of social justice movement and thinking about how do we, cultivate anti-racist classrooms as educators, cultural competency is extremely critical. So, through the lens of the global economy, it's important because if our students are going to interact, obviously with people who they maybe never have interacted with, how do we expose them enough to create or to develop their worldview outside of what they see day to day, right? And I think that's really important because when we don't engage students material or people or backgrounds or countries, whatever you might think, then it's a disservice because we need to, as educators, it's our responsibility to contribute to their worldview. So when we say cultural competency, it's the ability to have that awareness. So what does it look like? The ability to understand that you're going to have differences, that we're all unique. And, some of the other elements that tie into this are going to be, again, communication and collaboration, right? So you can see how all these start to work together, but what does it look like when we really try to cultivate the fact that we want our students to know that diversity increases the ability to think creatively and to contribute new ideas, right? So cultural competency, some of the platforms, obviously I've listed YouTube being a great way to find videos and also get them to become content creators, to share what goes on in their daily lives. So, for any of you who have done any work in culturally relevant pedagogy, a lot of what it means to develop cultural competency means to allow students to share their stories, their backgrounds, their perspectives, their views, and to create assignments and tasks that let them do that. So Scholastic has great content on that. And then I just added iMovie, which is a video editing tool. Students now really have the power to create. So empowering them to create videos that, capture a day in their life or get them to reflect and interview a family member who maybe came here from another country, and then having them share that with the class. You might think, whoa, isn't that social studies? Well, you know what, when they're using technology, you can really stream, you can build in any subject to any of these badges, right? But the key thing is to think about the foundation being, how do we use technology through that process? Because we can't avoid it, we can't escape it, and that's the goal of these skills. So finally, we're going to close out and we're going to talk about computational thinking. So computational thinking maybe being something that could be a bit more abstract for any of you who might be new to the world of computational thinking. And as you remember, we listed it as the fifth C. Here on the right, we have of course some platforms where they can kind of practice and get some technical skills done. Why is it important? Learning how a computer thinks helps students learn skills like explanatory writing, problem solving. So computational thinking, again, it does not mean coding. Coding is a part of it, but it's the ability to break down problems into kind of smaller step-by-step tasks. And that's going to be something that can be used in every environment, right? So under the umbrella of computational thinking, I want to talk about the specific tasks that kind of fall, right? So here we have decomposition. So how do we break down a problem into smaller tasks? Because as an educator, a lot of times what I see is students feel overwhelmed. They see a problem, they're like, oh, there's no way I can solve this. And through critical thinking, another C, right? We want them to look at it and say, okay, what's the first thing you could do? And a good story that I have for this, just a quick little story mode, was my sister who contacted me saying, hey, my check engine light is on my car. What should I do? And she said, my check engine, actually what she said was, my check engine light is on, I'm going to bring it to the mechanic. And I was like, okay, well, let's think about what we can do. So, we got the model of the car. We Googled what are some of the potential, typical issues that come up with this type of car, and the year and the make. And so she started doing some research, and then she basically, I was modeling how to take that big problem of the check engine light and figure out what she can do. So I think that right there is a good example of decomposition, is not letting the student feel so overwhelmed, but modeling what it is to say, wait, what would be phase one? Let's learn more about why the check engine light is on. Pattern recognition, so the ability to find similar. So even in the example I just gave, we're looking for the similarities, or we're looking for patterns in what are the more common issues that happen with this car that cause the check engine light, right? So again, my goal is to make sure that computational thinking doesn't feel so abstract for you. We're showing it, and this happens a lot. One of the most powerful experiences I ever had as an educator doing a PD was when a VPK teacher, a pre-K teacher, said that in the beginning of the workshop that she didn't know why she was there. She felt that computational thinking was not something that, she didn't see how that connected to such an early age. And as we started to go through the workshop, she had this aha moment. And when she created a lesson plan, she created one around compound words. And I think it was like the word butterfly, and how, butterfly together, right, is an animal, but separately mean two different things. And she remembers, taking that for granted. And all of a sudden she's like, wow, I'm teaching them, abstraction, and that's the idea, is to, again, be intentional. So when a teacher recognizes that by teaching compound words, they're teaching computational thinking, it's a very powerful thing, because now we get the whole ecosystem from like very young throughout being intentional about incorporating these things. So finally, algorithm design, and algorithms now being obviously probably a little more popular or common with this idea of, what are the steps you're going to need to solve a problem. So again, career computation is the sixth element for what we've created for our workforce ready preparation experience. And the way we have educators leverage that is basically through lesson plan creation, incorporating them, and each one of these actually has a rubric associated. So we really tried to make this feel way more tangible, because a lot of times when employers say we don't have, people are not available, our workers are not showing critical thinking, and it's just like, I thought about something hard. So we wanted to like demystify that, and having those conversations with students is really important. Talking about the soft skills that employers bring up at any age is really important. Making the connections that students don't normally make on their own is really critical. So here's just kind of like what the lesson plan again looks like. So we invite you, we can share this. It basically helps you kind of keep these in mind. And we have more samples of different teachers who have created that we're happy to share. Again, ultimately, if we think about being workforce ready, what does that look like? So the demonstration that we've just gone through is the cultivation of these soft skills. Hard skills, employers always say we can teach. Soft skills, skills related to, as we mentioned, the communication, collaboration skills like that, students need to be aware that they're practicing them, and teachers need to incorporate them intentionally throughout the learning experience. And that's what's going to make help make a successful transition to the workforce. So I'm going to pause there and invite any questions or comments. We stopped a little bit ahead of time, but feel free. Again, the link down here, the bit.ly Go Workforce, is just a way for you to give us your email where we can send you the link to the badges and to the rubrics for this experience. So happy to share that with you all. All right, so I'm just looking in the Q&A area for anyone who might have any questions. I'm curious who's actually in the room. Are you an educator? Who do we have in the room? Who joined us today? Teachers, K through 12, high school teacher, middle school, high school teacher. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, that's really great, Carol. I think that's a great point, and honestly, I hadn't really thought about digital persistence. It kind of came up as I was speaking, because, it's one thing that, they take for granted they have devices, but that doesn't mean they're going to like get the information. You still have to input things, and you're right. You can't just ask Alexa or just Google something, right? There's going to be scenarios that you're going to encounter for the first time, especially when you go to a new job, right? A new job, you might be asked to do something that they don't have an answer for, so you can't Google it. You got to experience it. So that's a great point. Thanks so much, Carol. That's really cool. Parent and artist, nice. One of the things, of course, we want to have a holistic approach to the development of students, right? And parents are so important, but really it's also an important thing for parents to develop in terms of how do teachers and parents communicate and collaborate, and how do we get that, because that's a very impactful experience for any of you parents who, and again, it's so tough because we have these schedules now with what's going on, which is why asynchronous communication is so important. But there's so many different learning management systems. I don't know. One of the things I heard from a lot of parents is that, they felt really frustrated because one teacher wanted something submitted this way and another teacher wants something submitted that way. And, I'm in the middle because I think that we do need to get them comfortable using and submitting in different platforms. But how do we filter so that the parent can feel that they can contribute without having to go through the pain of all of those different platforms too, right? So yeah. And Nikki, of course, cultural competency really is at the heart of all of these, right? So if you think about cultural competency, especially now through the lens of what's happening in our society, and people feeling empowered to share their story, the level of injustice that now social media really has brought to life, because a lot of these things have been happening. We have technology that now just has, basically brought it to surface. So we need to go beyond teaching our students just about, cyberbullying and some of the more common digital citizenship things, and also think about how do we cultivate them to appreciate diversity and the worldview of someone else. Cooperative extension agent in Texas, educating youth through adults. Cooperative extension agent in Texas, so educating youth through adults. So you're working with adults. I'm just reading here. You're working, you bring adults to help out in the classroom, or how does that work? And I'm responding here to Felice Acker, who posted a comment here on that. One of the programs, and I'll just speak quickly about it, but one of the programs that I think, first of all, we're just launching this program in Miami. It's called the Microsoft TEALS program. And TEALS is a program that pairs people who work in industry in the computer science world, and they actually volunteer 1 or 2 times a week in the mornings to co-teach in the computer science classroom. An incredible opportunity. We're kicking off with 7 high schools here in Miami. It's a national program, but you know, we've recruited almost 50 volunteers to spend some time with these teachers, right? Because again, teachers have a lot of pressure. You know, they have a lot of responsibility. Yeah, happy to share my bit.ly. It's put it in here. So I'm reading Bob Christie's comment here. I give similar presentations to teachers, and I start by describing a common scenario, like a student getting a job with a large local company and given a task. Sarah was with us 10 years ago. What could we have taught her that would help her in the situation she's in now? That gives some context they can relate back to. Yeah, that's a really great point. I think you know, there's no experience, you know, unless you have the experience, right? Experience is gained through real scenarios, and sometimes the only thing we can do as teachers, right, is share that. But how do we do more engaging activities? And I think the connection with programs like TEALS, where they bring people to the classroom, and again, you know, a lot of teachers do this stuff already, right? You show videos on YouTube, but do we give them the opportunity to also reflect about what they would do? So I really like that. I think it's important that we, you know, and that was actually one of the things that was done in one of the programs that I worked on, is that they assess someone's, you know, some of these skills through scenarios. So they said, what would you do if you know, your manager was out, the printer failed, and you needed something printed? And you can see based on responses where students are in terms of responding to that. Do you have any experience leveraging and modifying this for children with special needs? Stephen, that's actually a really great point. As far as experience, we've done work with Microsoft. I do have some content, and we're really just launching this. So the rubric, I want it to evolve. So I'm happy to, you know, take it offline and have a conversation with you about it. I think that's extremely critical. Diverse needs, especially now where we're putting students, unfortunately, who don't have access to technology or, you know, internet, and it's really tough working right now in an environment that, as educators, we also have to remember the physiological needs of our students. So I'm glad you brought that up. The rubric is kind of built to allow, is basically built to allow educators to customize what it would look like, you know, on that scale. So it's kind of like an open source rubric, basically. So I would love to, if there is anyone who has that experience, that could be a great panel to share. So thank you for bringing that up. One of the areas that we've been looking at is neurodiversity. So having conversations, and if you all haven't read about it, I do encourage you to learn a little bit about neurodiversity and what it means to, like, students, you know, who aren't used to or comfortable or have anxiety around presenting and sharing and being on a screen. There's a lot of pressure with this transition. There are elements of it that are, you know, very scary. And again, it goes back to us as educators being responsible for, you know, doing things the right way and remembering things like what Stephen is asking here. So thanks for sharing that. So really thoughtful questions. Thanks everyone. You know, this one was a lot of me presenting. You know, I'm happy, you know, my email, I'm happy to put my, actually, let's see here. I'd have to share this with, okay. Panelists and attendees is where I need to put this link here. And I'll actually share my email as well. I encourage you all, if you have any questions or if you need anything specifically, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to share some more. We're just diving into the journey. We've been doing it kind of as a kind of a beta, and now we're going to go live with adding this to our site and encouraging our teachers to join. There's also we have the Miami Computer Science Teachers Association here. So if you go to csteachers.org, I invite you to join that. A lot of resources, cool tips, and a little bit of everything there. So check out the site, csteachers.org. Join our Miami chapter. Even if you're not in Miami, it's still good to know what's happening all around you. So I want to thank everyone for participating today. Enjoy the rest of the conference. There's some really cool events I'm going to try to get to myself. And have a great day, everyone. Appreciate you all.